Hello, viewers. Welcome to another episode on how to improve your memory. Today we'll look at how to remember names. If you're new to the channel, be sure to go back and watch the earlier videos in this series. The link is in the description. On its own, this video won't make a whole lot of sense since I often draw upon ideas that I introduced earlier. So today we'll learn how to memorize people's names. So a couple years ago, I lived in Missouri and I was within driving distance of the St. Louis Chess Club. I'll use some of the famous chess players there as examples so you can learn their names. So this is Sam Shankland. He went on to win the U.S. Chess Championship not that long ago. So we need a memory palace, which we had in an earlier video, and we gotta use our memory techniques. We gotta make the names very visual. So a name like Sam on its own, not very visual. So how do I make it visual? I gotta change the name a little bit to get an image out of it. So Sam sounds a lot like him. So let's say that Sam is holding a big piece of ham, and I gotta put that in our memory palace. So I used some locations already in the memory palace in an earlier video on how to study, so let's go to some of the other locations in there. We did not use his cart, so let's have Sam and his big slab of ham. He's whacking that in the cart, and the cart is banging against the wall from the force of the impact. We said earlier in one of the previous videos, you want to make your images as wildly unusual as possible. If you see just Sam on the cart there eating the ham, that's a pretty mundane image. You could forget that. If he's slamming the cart with the ham and the cart is bashing against the wall, that's unforgettable. Alright, our next person to learn his name. This is world champion Magnus Carlsen. Again, Magnus is not a terribly visual name. Magnus sounds a lot like magnify, so let's imagine him with a big magnifying glass. This is the next location in our memory palace. So he's got his big magnifying glass over here and he's smashing against that ATM and the glass is just shattering everywhere and making a huge mess. Again, wildly unusual equals memorable. Let's learn another name. This is Sergey. Another name that's not very visual on its own, but Sergey sounds a lot like surgery, so let's imagine him doing surgery on a patient. Let's put that in the next location in our memory palace. Just imagine that happening right over here on this newspaper rack. So because I trained myself, I can see visuals in my head very, very quickly. If you're new to this, you might have to just pause the video and think about it for a bit and just really see that in your mind's eye. So feel free to do that if you have to. Don't feel forced to go along with my fast pace. Alright, so we got Sergey doing the surgery on this newspaper rack. Let's go and look at another chess player. This is Vichy. So that sounds a lot like fishy. Let's imagine him with a really big fish. In the next location of the memory palace, let's use the water fountain over here. So let's imagine Vichy standing and he's got his big fish and he's slamming that big fish into the water fountain. And it's making a big sound when he does that. Vichy, fishy. Alright, our next name. This is Wesley. How can I make that visual? Wesley sounds like Western. In Westerns you see cowboys with their cowboy hats and cowboy boots and they're riding a horse. Maybe they got a lasso as well. So let's imagine Wesley doing all that. Let's put him in our memory palace. We have this location there with the chairs. So Wesley is on a horse over here, and his horse is jumping on the chairs, and Wesley's got his cowboy hat and boots, and he's lassoing this display board over here. Again, if you have to, just pause the video and see that in your mind's eye before moving on. All right, next name. This is Hikaru. That name could be kind of hard to memorize if you're not used to seeing names like Hikaru. If you're in a memory competition, if that's among your ambitions, you can often boost your score by just skipping the hard names. But this name should be manageable. Hikaru sounds kind of like hiccup, so let's imagine Hikaru having a really severe case of hiccups and his body is really just violently being jerked every time he has a hiccup. Let's put that in the next location in our memory palace. That's over here on this desk. So you have Hikaru and his hiccups just violently shaking the desk every time he has a hiccup. So you get the idea of how it works. Most names are not very visual, but you can change them a little bit to make them visual. Just take that image and put in your memory palace somewhere, and now you have a way of remembering their names. So now let's do a quick review, since review does help our memory. We saw a guy slamming ham into this table. Ham, Sam, so that was Sam. Next location. We saw a guy with a big magnifying glass. That must be Magnus. Magnify Magnus. Next location. We saw a guy doing surgery here. Surgery Sergey. We saw someone slamming a fish against the water fountain. Fish Vishy. Fishy Vishy. So that was Vishy. Who came next? We saw a cowboy, a western cowboy, on the chairs here. Western Wesley. So that was Wesley. And our last location, we saw someone with the hiccups. Hiccups Hikaru. So that's how you remember names. Be sure to tune in for our next episode and learn more about memory. I hope this inspired you to unlock your massive potential.